All right, let's get right into it. A lot of us have been through a root canal, or at least know someone who has. And while the procedure itself is supposed to be the fix, there's this nagging question that can stick around long after you've left the dentist's chair. What is actually going on inside your jawbone? Today, we're going to unpack the surprising science of how you heal.
And this is really the big question, isn't it? The tooth itself might feel a whole lot better, but what about that infection that was around the root, deep down in the bone? How can you be sure that fight is really over? It's a question that both patients and dentists grapple with, and the answer, as you'll see, is a lot more interesting than you might think.
So, before we go any farther, let's put a name to the villain of our story. Apical periodontitis. That's just the fancy term for that infection in the bone. When a dentist looks at an X-ray, it shows up as this dark spot, or a lesion, right at the very tip of the tooth's root. The whole point of the root canal is to get rid of the source of this problem so your body can step in and heal that spot.
Okay, so if we need to heal that dark spot, how do we actually track it? How do we know it's getting better? Well, for a long time, the tools we had could only really give us a glimpse, not the full picture of what was happening inside the bone. This right here shows the massive leap in technology. On the left, you've got your standard 2D X-ray. It's flat. And the problem is, other things in your mouth, other roots, your sinuses, can cast shadows over the area, creating what's called anatomical noise. It can totally hide how big the infection really is. But on the right, that's the 3D CBCT scan, and it is a total game changer, giving us a complete three-dimensional view of everything. And here's why that 3D view is so powerful. With this tech, researchers can actually go in, slice by digital slice, and trace the exact outline of the infected area. That means they can calculate its precise volume. So we're not just guessing from a flat shadow anymore, we're literally measuring healing in cubic millimeters. That kind of precision is everything.
And it's that incredible precision that was at the heart of a recent study we're looking at today. Scientists followed 79 patients, all of whom had these large infections, to answer two really simple but important questions. What actually predicts if you're going to heal, and how long is it really going to take?
So what did they find? This is where we get the answers. And the data from those 79 people paints this really fascinating and honestly pretty unexpected picture of how our bodies can regenerate bone.
First off, the headline number. The study found that 76% of these cases completely healed. And remember, these weren't small spots. These were all large infections to begin with. That's an amazing success rate. It shows that if the root canal is done right, the body can absolutely do its job and repair the damage.
But here is the number that will probably make you pause. The average time it took for that complete healing to happen? 19 months. That's more than a year and a half. Healing isn't some quick fix. It's a marathon, not a sprint, for your body.
And this chart breaks that timeline down even more. You can see that, yeah, some healing happens in that first year. But look at that spike. The peak healing period, where a whopping 60% of the healing happened, was between 12 and 18 months. So the big takeaway here is that the most traumatic changes are often happening well into that second year after treatment.
So that leads to the next obvious question, right? If the average is 19 months, what makes some people heal faster and others slower? Well, the researchers dug into all the data and found two key factors that really predicted how long the healing journey would take.
The first big one was pretty simple: the patient's age. I mean, it's just a fact of life, you know? As we get older, our body's amazing repair systems tend to slow down a bit. And the study found a direct, measurable link between how old a patient was and how long it took for their bone to fully grow back.
And they were able to nail it down to an exact number. For every single year older a patient was, the healing time went up by 4.9%. Now think about that for a second. That means a 50-year-old, all else being equal, is going to have a significantly longer healing timeline than a 30-year-old, just because of this one factor. The second key factor is one that just makes total sense when you think about it: how big the infection was to begin with. You know, a bigger hole in the ground just takes longer to fill. It's the same idea here. The more bone that was damaged by the infection, the more work your body has to put in to rebuild it.
And again, thanks to those 3D scans, they could be incredibly precise. For every extra cubic millimeter of the lesion's starting size, the healing time increased by 0.3%. Now that sounds tiny, but these infections are made up of hundreds of cubic millimeters, so all those little percentages really start to add up and have a major impact.
You know, what they found didn't matter is almost as interesting. Things you might think would have an effect, like the patient's gender, or whether it was their first root canal or a do-over, or even the specific material used to fill the root. Nope, none of those had a real statistical impact on how fast the bone healed. It really just came down to age and size.
And here it is, This is the payoff. This is what success looks like. On the left, you see the scan before treatment. That big, dark shadow of infection is so clear. And then you look at the right image, 24 months later, it's gone. The bone has completely filled back in. It is just a remarkable picture of what your body can do once the source of the problem is gone.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway for us in the real world? Well, everything this study found really boils down to two key ideas: patience and precision.
Here's why this all matters. First, it helps set realistic expectations. Healing takes time, sometimes years. It also explains why your dentist might want to just monitor a tooth for a long time. They're looking for that slow but steady progress. So, if that dark spot is shrinking even a little bit, that's good news. And finally, it just drives home how valuable that precise 3D imaging is for making the right call.
And the researchers who did this study, they summed it up perfectly. It's not about guessing anymore. It's about knowing the key factors. Understanding that age and the initial size of the infection are the main drivers helps dentists create a much smarter, more personalized follow-up plan for every single patient.
Which brings us to our final thought for you. Now that you know that healing is a marathon, not a sprint, and that we have the tools to track it precisely, how does that change the conversation you might have with your dentist? It gives you the power to ask better questions and to understand that sometimes the best treatment is just patient, careful observation.